Right, good evening, members, and welcome to our new venue for the evening. I'll just wait one person to sit down. I think that everybody's seated now. Can I ask, are we recording yet? Right, so we'll be recording wherever the press is. We will be recording. We'll start that after the chaplain's given his prayers. So if I could introduce my chaplain, please. That's the Reverend Chris Besant. He's from St Bartholomew's and St Christopher's in Haslemere, and I'd invite him, please, to lead the council in a moment of reflection. He's at the back of the room. Chris, all yours.
Much.
Are we? All right. And for anybody who doesn't know, this is being recorded. So I go to my welcome. Now, welcome members and the public to the council meeting, which is being held in the Great Hall at the Farnham Maltings, as it is not possible for the full council to meet together in the council chamber at the council offices, whilst maintaining appropriate social distancing to reduce the risk of COVID infection. Councillors are supported this evening by the Chief Executive, Tom Horwood, Strategic Directors Annie Ryson and Graham Clark, the Head of Policy and Governance Robin Taylor, the Head of Finance and Property Peter Vickers, the Borough Solicitor Daniel Bainbridge, and the Democratic Services and Business Support Team Manager Louise Fleming. Members, please raise your hand to indicate that you wish to speak, and you'll be operating your own microphones. And you do that by pressing the bottom right button. The microphone is slightly flexible, so if you do need to move the microphone, you can do so. So confirm that we are live streaming. It's a long agenda and we are in an unfamiliar setting. So I'd like to ask members for their patience this evening. We must conclude the business tonight by 10:30 p.m. Otherwise we'll get locked out. So I would ask that you keep statements brief and to the point to enable us to get through this business. Speeches will be timed, and you will be given a 30-second warning before your time is up. And that time, of course, is the normal 4 minutes. I will be altering the order of business tonight to consider item 10 before item 9, as there is an exempt item of business prior to item 10, and there's no point clearing everybody out to hear that. Finally, I will waive the requirement to stand when speaking, and you can remain seated tonight. So to beginning the agenda, item 1, apologies for absence. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've received apologies from councillors Brian Adams, Roger Blishen, Jan Floyd Douglas, Brian Edmonds, Val Henry, George Hess, Jackie Keane, Robert Knowles, Penny Marriott, Peter Martin, Julia Potts, Anne-Marie Rosamond and George Wilson.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, could I add Councillor Wicks is being held up in traffic and will be arriving late, but she does intend to be here.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Now, the minutes of the council meeting held on the 20th of April and the 27th of April 2021. I would like to ask the members if anyone has an issue with the accuracy of the minutes. Please note that there was an omission in the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of April relating to a motion to refer a question to the executive, and this has been corrected in the version published on the council's website and the minute book should any member wish to inspect them. Is there anybody who wishes to make a comment? Thank you very much. In that case, members, would you indicate your agreement to the minutes of the meetings held on the 20th of April with correction and the 27th of April 2021? Do we all agree that? Agreed. Thank you. I will sign these later. Declarations of interest. Again, Robin, have there been any declarations prior to the meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All members of the senior management team have declared their interest in respect of item 9.2, options for collaboration with Guildford Borough Council, and all members of the senior team will leave the meeting.
Being Mayor of Waverley for the past 3 months, I'm looking forward to the borough coming out of the present COVID regulations. Like many, I have had 2 vaccinations, and I've been promised that I am very unlikely to become seriously ill if I come into contact with it, and I'm very unlikely to die. Although this will give us confidence in returning to our previous lives, many things have changed, and of course will continue to do so. I must first praise the tremendous work the staff and councillors in Waverley have done to help support our community in these terrible times since March 2020. Many have given up hours of their own time to ensure that the most vulnerable receive the help and funding that they needed. And of course, we've had a huge number of volunteers right across Waverley, ensuring that basic essentials, such as food, was available for all those that needed it. I thank you all. I have at last seen an increase in invitations to attend both public and private events. In fact, I've just come from the Cathedral at Guildford, where I was invited to the judiciary. My first attendance with the Mayoress, Councillor Jackie Keane, was the starting of our new homes at Oxford Ridge. Though I must be absolutely honest, I was very disappointed I wasn't allowed to drive their nice big digger. They told me I couldn't do it. They weren't insured. We were invited to attend a cream tea afternoon at Hazelmere Museum. We did enjoy the scones with jam and cream. Unfortunately, with the usual argument about whether you put on the jam or cream first. I always put on the jam so it doesn't slide around, otherwise it becomes very messy. We then went to Cranley, not on the same day, I hasten to add, to help judge the carnival floats, which the Lions had organised. And I must praise the Lions. They are still raising money for local charity after 42 years in that area. And they tell me that they raise £50,000 a year, hosting many of the events for local charities. That is a huge amount of dedication of work, buckets, and of course, events. There must be something about Cranley linked with sunshine. Liz, I must come over to your part of the world. The carnival was one of this year's really hot days, and we were then invited the following week to a care home, also in Cranley. And yes, it was hot, thank goodness, as they had a barbecue, which was cooked by their prize-winning chef. When he told us he was prize-winning, so I've taken him at his word. The food tasted very good. Of course, as we headed home to Hazelmere, the rain started and set in for the rest of that day. Now, I'm hoping that we can raise a similar amount for my charities this coming year. Now, as you know, I haven't announced who they are yet, but I have decided to support 3 charities that I have known for many years. The first, and there's no order here except I'm going from Hazelmere towards Godalming. The first is A Place to Be, a youth club in Hazelmere. I helped to set this up when youth clubs were stopped across Surrey in the 90s. After all, young people are our future, and we must support them. Despite the headlines, the vast majority are honest, hard-working young people who deserve some relaxation out of the school environment. The second is the Hydestyle Wildlife Hospital. Over many years, I've taken in injured wildlife and cared for them. They are at present looking for premises to house some of their injured animals. And my third is Skillway, which many people in Godalming will know. Again, an organisation that is youth-orientated. Run as a caring charity, they introduce and teach skills to those that have not had the opportunity of a complete education. And I will finish by congratulating one of our members, Councillor Carol Coburn, on her being awarded the BEM for her work in planning. Well done, Carol, you deserve it. Thank you. I will now pass over to the leader for his announcements, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, members, and welcome to Farnham. A very interesting venue for us all today, and certainly a little different. I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible. Board now, Deputy Mayor, the administration would like to have small announcements, both from me and with your consent, Mr. Mayor, from the members of the executive. My very brief comments, I will first of all just say thank you to the officers that have made this event tonight possible in such a professional and safe manner. This was done at short notice and with great skill, and I thank you all for making this possible tonight. Indeed, it might actually be working a little bit better than in our own chamber, which is something I'm sure we can pick up later. I have been having one-to-one meetings with each member of the executive over the last month or so in order just to make sure that the portfolios are relevant 2 and a bit years into this administration. I've concluded those meetings now, the last one being Councillor Penny Marriott. And so I'm making all members aware that there will be a slightly rejigged version of the executive portfolio roles being distributed in the next 2 weeks or so for members' reference. No serious changes, more just clarification of where we are. Other than that, I'm sure many members will be probably a little tired of hearing from me by the time we get to the end of the evening. So I'm going to move on to the first member of the executive, the Deputy Leader, Councillor Peter Clark.
Thank you, Leader. As my portfolio includes IT, I've mentioned in my previous updates regarding our continued fight against the onslaught of cybercrime. Until recently, most cybercrime has been in the form of phishing emails or attacks on the infrastructure of organisations that hold sensitive customer data. At Waverley, we receive thousands of attacks every single week, mostly automated bot attacks, attempting to gain access to our systems. Of course, we treat the protection of our services and our residents' data very seriously. So I'm pleased to confirm the recent appointment of a full-time cybersecurity manager who will take control of our defences against the cyber criminals and develop them on an ongoing basis. But more recently, since the advent of the pandemic, in fact, there has been a noticeable shift to attacks using bogus text messages. These are often highly sophisticated and can include bogus messages from the likes of Royal Mail, well-known courier brands such as DPD, Her Majesty's Inland Revenue, and even the NHS regarding vaccination appointments. So I would urge all councillors, staff and residents to be on their guard. Please think before you click. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, members. I'll make some brief comments on Brightwells and on planning. In terms of Brightwells, the build is going well, and I'm pleased to say we've received a good report recently from the Independent Monitoring Officer on the quality of the build within the scheme, which is quite encouraging. Chris Nicholson also tell us that they expect on the residential side, the first flats to be occupied later this year, and the car park for residents and for the general public to open later this year as well. In terms of the commercial side, covering the retail, restaurants and the cinema, that we now expect that to open early next year. One interesting thing, those who have followed the Herald will have noticed an article from David Howell in the Herald talking about how the retail side of farming is picking up quite well, particularly the shops that were previously closed being opened again by independent retailers. So that's pretty encouraging in terms of the letting out of the shops, etc., within the Brightwell scheme. And Crestland, sorry, are in positive negotiations with a number of prospective tenants. In terms of planning, I'll cover briefly two things. One, the planning improvement programme. I don't need to say anything really about that because members received a briefing from Zach and his team on that recently, an all-member briefing. In terms of LPP2, I'll be covering quite a lot of that in answer to a question later. But I'll just say briefly, the team are continuing to work on the over 1,000 responses to the consultation. This has thrown up a number of issues to be dealt with and responded to, particularly in Hazelmere, but not just in Hazelmere, elsewhere in the borough. And the leader has made a commitment that we will finish LPP2 by the end of this year and submit it to the inspector for the examination in public. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Leader. Mr. Mayor, good evening, everybody. I'm actually not going to add anything substantive. We've got plenty to talk about later on, but I'd just like to echo your acknowledgement and thanks to the officers and the team for putting this together tonight, because I know how hard they've been busy doing their regular stuff, plus the stuff on the agenda tonight. And I think it's well worth our thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Mirrlees.
Thank you, Leader. With the commissioning of SLAs coming up, I've been visiting the recipients of the SLAs across the borough to get to know what they do in serving their communities. And meanwhile, we've been gathering data to start shaping our partnership funding priorities for the borough, and have sent out a questionnaire to town and parish councils to get a better understanding of what they feel their priorities are for the local community, especially after this time of COVID. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Mayoral. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, councillors. I'm pleased to report that parking usage is now back around the average over the last 3 years. It was obviously depressed last year, as we all know, but nonetheless, the trend has definitely been positive. The only other point is that the next SIL round will open in September, so we look forward to councillors encouraging local groups to put their names forward or put their projects forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, members. I'm delighted to announce that the Economic Development Team is developing its network, its business network further through our COVID action plan. And we are now working with Surrey University on the production of a series of webinars for businesses on digital connectivity and including sector-specific opportunities for 5G, and these will be commencing in September. We're also working closely with the leisure sector and our leisure team on team in order to promote the monitoring the visitor numbers, and whilst they are encouraging so far, it is recognised that this is a sector that has been very hard hit over the past year. Our green spaces continue to see unprecedented numbers of visitors, particularly at Frensham Ponds, and whilst we have had put in a number of interventions to improve cases of inconsiderate and illegal parking, and we'll be introducing further measures to intervene and deter visitors at an earlier stage in their journey to the site, members will be aware that we are still experiencing an unreasonable and heightened level of antisocial behaviour towards other visitors and towards our staff. We have a zero tolerance on this behaviour and will report every incident to the police. We are also investigating additional on-site enforcement measures. Our plant life grass cutting campaign, No Mo May, has received a lot of support across the borough and some complaints as well as general observations. We were using all of this really helpful feedback in our plans for next year, enabling us to identify which sites would benefit from a change in the grass cutting programme and which require a more flexible approach. I would very much like to thank our Green Spaces team and contractors for all their hard work in helping to introduce this important boost to biodiversity across the borough. We have also continued in our trials to use non-glyphosate weed killers in our parks and on Surrey County Council highway sites at 4 points across the borough. And this is building on our trials last year as part of our pledge to phase out the use of harmful pesticides. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. And last but never least, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Leader, and good evening, everybody. Just some brief items on environment and sustainability. First of all, we are currently in the process of investigating options for developing one or more solar farm in the borough, in line with our goal of creating locally generated sustainable energy. Plans are going ahead for developing long-term cycle storage in Cranley, Godalming and Hazelmere, while discussions continue with key stakeholders about the finer detail in the case of proposals for a cycle storage in Farnham. Following our successful bid to the Decarbonisation Fund, our specification for the retrofitting of the Memorial Hall in Farnham has been accepted, and we are set up for delivery of a sustainable memorial hall in Farnham by October of this year. And finally, just for those of us who are not aware, Waverley Borough Council will be represented as a Rule 6 party at the appeal by UK Oil and Gas, or UKOG, against the refusal by Surrey County Council to grant planning permission for a gas drilling operation in Dunsfold. We've engaged a consultant to lead on this, and officers are working hard with our consultant to build the case against the drilling for fossil fuels within our borough, in line with our policy.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Mayor. That concludes leaders' announcements.
Somebody had to forget the microphone, didn't they? Right, thank you, Leader. The next item, the questions from members of the public. I understand that there were no questions received from members of the public. So going on to item 7, question from members. Now, I'd like to report that there has been a question received from Councillor Robert Knowles and one from the Leader. As Councillor Knowles has given his apologies, Councillor Townsend will read out the question and respond. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question was, Lloyds Bank plc have announced the closure of Hazelmere branch by the end of the year. In my memory, Hazelmere has 2 Lloyds branches, 2 NatWest and Midland HSBC, a Barclays and a number of building society branches, including Woolwich, Abbey National, National and Provincial and Halifax. With the closure of Lloyds, there will be no bank or building society in the town, with a population in 3 counties of some 19,000. What representations are the administration making to preserve some vital financial facility in Hazelmere? And my response, Mr. Mayor, many banks have closed across Waverley in recent years due to decreased financial viability. With customers moving online, the problem is now particularly acute in Hazelmere, with the news that the last bank in the town, the Lloyds, is to close in the autumn. Although the borough is currently well served for post offices, which are providing more financial services, there remains a particular issue with regard to access to cash throughout the day and night. The Economic Development team has been working with Hazelmere Town Council and Hazelmere Chamber to request the installation of a cash machine in the town centre. A proposed site owned by Hazelmere Town Council in the central car park was circulated to providers, together with evidence of significant local footfall. There was unfortunately little interest pre-COVID. However, with the news of the last bank closure, we have asked the cash point providers to urgently reconsider the situation. We have also provided Hazelmere Town Council with details for the CEO of Link, and Jeremy Hunt MP has written to him to support the case for a cash point in Hazelmere. We have put Lloyds mobile banking team in touch with Hazelmere Town Council to discuss the provision of a mobile banking service along the lines of the van they currently offer in Cranley. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. Obviously, as a representative from Hazelmere, I fully endorse the way ahead, and I hope that we can get at least a cash point in the town centre. It desperately needs it. It needs to help the businesses and, of course, some cash for the car parks. If I could now ask Councillor Follows to read out his question, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question relates to the relationship between Local Plan Part 2 and the 5-year housing land supply. My question, several experienced members of this council have suggested in the press that LPP2 has a relationship to our 5-year housing land supply. For example, more recently in analysing our successful defence of the planning appeal for the land at Lower Webburn Lane, for which I congratulate our team. It is my understanding that this relationship is minimal and that Local Plan Part 2, although desirable, will not resolve many of the issues the planning system causes for Waverley Borough Council. Could the head of planning or portfolio holder for planning outline what, if any, relationship LPP2 has to the housing land supply? And could they comment upon planning issues facing Waverley Borough Council that are not resolved by Local Plan Part 2? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. I understand Councillor MacLeod is going to respond.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's clear that the leader is seeking clarification on this important matter, not just for himself, but for all members and for members of the public. Thus, Jack Gilwood, the Chief Planning Officer, and myself have drawn up a joint statement in response. We tried to make this as factual and complete as we possibly can, and thus I'm afraid it's a little bit longer than perhaps the normal answers to questions. So I'll just have to ask members to bear with me while I read out the statement. The government's requirement for a 5-year housing land supply means the council must provide evidence that enough homes in the borough can realistically be completed within 5 years to meet the housing needed. Although it is desirable to have housing allocations in LPP, adopted to provide some certainty from our communities, this does not mean that the homes on allocated sites within a local plan can automatically be concluded within the 5-year housing supply, as such housing can only be included where there is a clear evidence that the housing can be completed within the 5-year period. For the purpose of demonstrating a 5-year housing supply, the onus is on the council to provide the evidence to demonstrate these sites will deliver housing within that period, which is not the case with every proposed allocation in either LPP2 or even in the adopted local plan part 1. It is also important to point out that the local plan is not the only plan allocating sites for housing in the borough. Some of our local communities have decided to carry out their own site allocation for housing in their neighbourhood plans. Although excellent process has been made within the borough overall, some expected housing allocations within the neighbourhood plans are still to be made. As it currently stands, LPPT is only proposing to allocate around 200 homes in Whitley Parish and approximately 300 in Hazelmere, which equates to less than 5% of our total housing requirement for the local plan period to 2032. In Hazelmere, most of the sites currently proposed for allocation in LPP2 lie within the built-up area or in brownfield land. Development is currently strategic policies adopted in local plan part 1 supports. It is not the case that these brownfield sites have to wait until LPP2 is adopted before they can proceed through the planning application process. Progress in housing being delivered on these sites is therefore not reliant on LPP2 being adopted. Accordingly, while we fully recognise the importance of local plan part 2 and are working hard to take it through to submission to the Secretary of State, simply adopting this plan will not in itself alter the Council's current position on not being able to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, without which countryside areas outside the Green Belt will continue to be targeted by the development industry. What is really needed is for sufficient full or reserved matters planning applications to be granted for housing on suitable sites, and for developers to get on with delivering on the outstanding planning permissions for almost 3,000 houses within the borough that have yet to be commenced. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. I am now on item 8, motions, and we have not received any motions. Thank you very much. So I move on to our next item, which I've moved forward, which is item 10, the minutes of the Licensing and Regulatory Committee. So if I could ask Councillor Goodridge, please, to move the minutes held on the 14th of June.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have pleasure in presenting the report of the Licensing Committee held on the 14th of June. I have a seconder.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Pleased to second the motion.
There are no part 1 items, and I'm not aware of any questions under part 2, if the minutes had been written with parts 1 and 2 in them. There are no other questions on any other parts. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Can I ask the council, please, to agree to receive and note the minutes?
Agreed.
Thank you, that is agreed. So I now come to item 9, minutes of the executive. May I please invite the leader again to introduce the minutes of the meetings held on the 22nd of June.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. May I propose and introduce the minutes of the executive held on the 22nd of June 2021. I believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to item 9.1 on our agenda, Local Government Boundary Commission for England Boundary Review, which is the warding pattern submission. If I may briefly introduce this item for members. Presented to members is a recommendation for a submission to the Local Government Boundary Commission of possible warding patterns and other comments from members to support a reduction from 57 councillors to 50. I would take this opportunity to remind members that the Local Government Boundary Commission are doing this work at the time they are because their mandate to undertake this work has not been rescinded by the government during this pandemic. It has also absolutely no linkages to the Parliamentary Boundary Commission review that has been undertaken concurrently and has recently produced some recommendations. The recommendation before you presents the outcomes of a cross-party working group chaired by the Deputy Mayor, Councillor John Ward, that met to put proposals together to help inform the Commission in their work on our warding patterns with local knowledge from members. They are, of course, not obliged to do what we ask here, but we hope that this submission informs their decision-making process going forward. Mr. Mayor, with your consent, may I invite the Chair of the cross-party working group, Councillor John Ward, to address the Council on this matter.
Thank you. Councillor follows. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Leader. We had a number of meetings which were very fruitful, and we came to a very broad consensus. Let me first of all echo what was said by the Leader, that it was not our choice to do this exercise at this time. The Boundary Commission are forced to do reviews every now and again, and apparently we haven't been reviewed for 20 years, so we came near the top of the list. It was not, we thought, very appropriate in the consideration of COVID, the unitary threats, planning changing, and all the many other things apart from cuts in government finance that are besetting the council at the moment. We made this clear to the Boundary Commission, but it's not their fault. They're stuck with it. They have to do it. So our group got together, and in view of that, one of our aims was to severely limit the amount of work we were putting on our already overstretched officers. And we came across really very clearly with a number of principles, the main one of which was we wanted, if at all possible, to avoid single member wards. There are many disadvantages to those, which are obvious to most councillors. If the member is ill, for instance, the members are unrepresented, and two members in a ward just covers holidays and gives a better balance, and more members may or may not be the best thing to do. In general, we found that the officers presented a number of cases to us. And in trying to retain just two members per ward, it just proved far too difficult, in fact, impossible to come up with a sensible solution. So we modified our views to try as far as possible to base it on two-member wards within the four conurbations, towns, big villages, whatever you may call them, within the borough, and larger three-member wards in what we'll broadly call the countryside. So that is the principle of the map that you see before you in the minutes. I should stress the Boundary Commission are not in any way bound to take any notice whatsoever of what we tell them, which is another good reason not to spend too much officer time producing something that may not work. So the broad skeleton that you see in front of you fits in with those principles: two members in town as far as possible, larger three-member wards in the countryside. We would like to submit that to the Boundary Commission. They then go away and do what we call the nitty-gritty, the hard graft, which after all is what they're paid for, to come up with the actual ward boundaries. It then comes back to us for us to consider and make our comments. They may or may not take cognizance of them. And then effectively the final plan will go to the House of Commons. So there's a lot of work gone into this. I've given you the broad principles on which we worked. And I hope you will approve the skeleton, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. Now, I'm obviously now throwing this open to members for questions. I'm afraid I'm having a little difficulty in seeing you all. I've got a guide here. I'll try and take you in order. I apologise in advance. So first of all then, Councillor Seaborn, I think you just made it first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't understand how the detail of the recommended ward pattern was derived, but I appreciate the challenges that these exercises present. Given that I've had the opportunity to participate in the broader consultation and express my views, and that there will be further opportunity to comment when the boundary commissioners issue the recommendation, I won't be voting against the recommendation. But I would point out, however, that the grouping of parishes described as eastern villages suggests a lack of geographical attention to detail. Bramley, Wonersh, Blackheath and Shamley Green cluster neatly and share facilities and activities, which is what we're aiming for. They have relatively little in common with Hascombe and Hambledon. So I fail to understand why this new ward has been recommended with a 9% variance when it involves grouping communities that have very little connectivity or common interest. And I also worry about the arithmetic behind the various recommendations. Options 2 and 3A assign a 2027 electorate to eastern villages of 6,881. Options 3B and 3C describe eastern villages as the same combinations as in options 2 and 3A. But the voter numbers shrink to 6,244, and Hambledon is also counted with Whitley and Chiddingfold in options 3B and with Chiddingfold in 3C. So the numerical difference between 3A and 3B and 3C equates to the movement of Hambledon. But if so, why is it also listed within eastern villages in options 3B and 3C? Like so much that's put in front of us, the details are not clear. And for that reason, while I'm not going to vote against the recommendation, neither will I be supporting it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I have Councillor Gray next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like Councillor Seaborn, I recognise the amount of work that's gone in it, but the final proposal, which basically puts forward Oldfold, Chiddingfold and Dunsfold as a ward, is, in my mind, makes no sense. That there is no links between Oldfold and Chiddingfold and Dunsfold. There are a lot of links between Chiddingfold and Dunsfold and Hascombe and to some extent Hambledon. And there are alternatives to this. Oldfold and Dunsfold historically had been connected, and it was found not to be in the best interest of residents, and those were split off. So I don't agree with that collection, and for this reason, and also a lack of any support to this, I won't be supporting this proposal, and I will be voting against. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, I think this is an excellent submission. It's neat and polished, and of course arithmetically correct. It respects the basic building block of local government by keeping intact parish councils. I think that's very important. And also the parish ward groups mainly align with the county divisions. So therefore they're readily understood by local people. And finally, the town group borders have been kept intact, which is welcomed and reduced proportionally. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. I now have Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have said all along that the reason why Waverley has 57 councillors is because that is the only way that it's practically possible to properly represent the villages. And now that the Boundary Commission has come up with the 50, which is what the majority of this council decided was best, it just illustrates the problem. Again, eastern villages, I happen to represent a ward where I'm a single member ward. I've found it no problem in the last decade or two. But we are now going to be represented, 3 people are going to be representing 7 villages. Blackheath, Wanner, Shamley Green, Bramley, Hascombe, Hambledon, Busbridge. And I think I'm right in saying 5 parish councils. I take the view that it's important that a borough councillor does visit all the parish council meetings. This is going to be a nightmare for borough councillors representing such a large chunk of Waverley, which is bigger than Godalming and Farnham put together geographically, and I suspect the same problem in western villages. So I accept that option 2 is the best one for sorting out the figures. But when one starts reflecting on the interests and identities of local communities, which is what the Boundary Commission have to do, I seriously worry that this won't apply. We also have 2 MPs representing 1 ward, which adds to the excitement. And I'm therefore very unhappy. I can see that we're trying to be green and cut down on travel, but for ward members of eastern villages, I think we'll be travelling quite a lot to get around the whole of the patch. So I'm not going to vote for it. I'm not going to vote against either. I should abstain. Thank you.
And Councillor Goodrich, I can't see any more hands. Oh, sorry, Councillor Coburn, you suddenly put your hand up.
Well, I just thought I ought to have a brief word on behalf of the towns, because I don't like doing anything that doesn't have a benefit at the end of it. I can't see the point. We've wasted a lot of time on this already. And at the end of the whole process, we're not going to improve what's wrong at the moment with the wards in Farnham, because as soon as you concoct wards by trying to make a number of wards, which is what happened last time, we went from 6 or 7 to 9. We ended up with 9 wards that bear no relation to any community that anybody lives in. This came out when we were trying to work out the character of certain areas, and nobody responded, and we realised they hadn't a clue they lived in Firgrove, because Firgrove doesn't really exist at all. Firgrove is a bit of the Bourne, in fact quite a large bit of the Bourne. And I do think if we are going to go back and have a look at trying to make this mean a little bit more, trying to bring, if you like, more people into the electoral system because it's interesting, at least if you're voting within your parish, within your area, within the area that has its own show and all the other things that it does, then you can see the point in voting. So I just feel it's a wasted opportunity. I don't like 8 wards of 2. I would rather start with the geography, look at the natural boundaries, and then work out how many wards you have and how many councillors per ward. You certainly wouldn't have any single councillor wards doing it that way, as far as I can see, because the parishes, and Farnham is completely parish, the parishes do take in quite a large area, so you would always have a 2 councillor ward. But anyway, I just wanted to make the point. Everyone was talking about the villages, and I just think the towns need a bit of support occasionally.
Thank you, Councillor Colburn. I cannot see any more hands. Therefore, I'll now go back to the leader, please. If I could ask Councillor Follows to sum up and respond, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I completely agree. We've had to use a great deal of time on this, and I take you back again to the reasons why we're having to do this at all. In Waverley, we often seem to be almost prisoners of geography, and in some cases, perhaps somewhat slave to it. And if this year has demonstrated anything, it's demonstrated that for many councillors, presence does not always have to mean being there in person. There are plenty of ways that councillors have managed to interact throughout this pandemic with their residents. And I think trying to base an argument for the Boundary Commission based upon the number of parishes in a geographic area, however valid it may be to many councillors, is not something that is relevant to what the Boundary Commissioner are actually looking at. This is obviously a deeply inexact science, and I personally, at the beginning of this process, could not foresee any scenario in which all members would be completely content either with the numbers proposed or with any of the proposals for warding patterns that we're presenting. And as Councillor Ward has made very clear, there is only so much time and resource that anyone was really going to be prepared to put into this, knowing full well that the Boundary Commission aren't obliged to listen to us, but also that it is their job to actually conduct these warding patterns. So, Mr. Mayor, I would propose to move the recommendation, as we'll likely be calling several more of these later, and as the custom and practice of this administration is is roll call voting, and this is a good opportunity to test the process today in a fairly benign part of the agenda. I would like to call a roll call vote on the recommendation and would seek 4 members to support that.
Can I see 4 other members, please, for a recorded vote? Yep, you have your report. Thank you. So there is one recommendation. The Waverley makes a submission on future warding patterns to the Local Government Boundary Commission for England, comprising option 2 on detailed in Annex 1 and illustrated in Annex 2, plus the qualitative comments on warding issues as set out in Annex 3. Louise Fleming, can you carry out the roll call, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors, when I call your name, please confirm whether you wish to vote for, vote against, or abstain. Councillor Baker.
For.
Councillor Beeman.
For.
Councillor Clark.
For.
Councillor Coburn.
Abstain.
Councillor Cossa.
Abstain.
Councillor Darcy.
For.
Councillor Davidson. Councillor Denis. Councillor Deer.
Abstain.
Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Ellis.
Abstain.
Councillor Else. Sorry,
Against.
Councillor David Else. Councillor Jenny Else.
Abstain.
Councillor Follows.
For.
Councillor Forozeski.
Against.
Councillor Gale.
For.
Councillor Goodridge.
Abstain.
Councillor Gray.
Against.
Councillor Hegan.
For.
Councillor Howard. Not present. Councillor Hunt. Councillor Hyman.
For.
Councillor Isherwood.
Against.
Councillor James.
Against.
Councillor MacLeod.
For.
Councillor Michaela Martin.
For.
Councillor Merriweather.
For.
Councillor Mirrlees.
For.
Councillor Mulliner.
Abstain.
Councillor Neal.
For.
Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Palmer.
For.
Councillor Reid. Not present. Councillor Paul Rivers.
For.
Councillor Penny Rivers.
For.
Councillor Rubini. Mr.
For.
Mayor. Councillor Sadler.
Abstain.
Councillor Seaborn.
Abstain.
Councillor Townsend.
For.
Councillor Ward, Deputy Mayor.
For.
Councillor Wicks.
For.
Councillor Williams.
For.
Okay, and the result of the vote and
Thank you. Options 9.2, options for collaboration with Guildford Borough Council. And I have to ask at this point the members of the senior management team to leave the meeting. Thank you, members. We've now, I'm afraid, got rid of all the senior management team and to advise us so. Members, please ensure that during the course of debate, you do not refer to any material contained in the exempt pink papers. If members wish to refer to any of this information, the meeting must resolve to exclude the press and the public. If I could now ask Councillor Paul Follows to introduce and move the recommendation from the executive.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I may introduce the recommendation from the executive, I believe I have a seconder.
Happy to second, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Good evening, members again. I'll try to limit the time I spend on the introduction of this item, as I think much of the value this evening is going to derive from our ability to discuss this together. Members will recall a full briefing on this subject a few weeks ago, as well as a more open executive session, which we decided to expand in order to have a more constructive discussion. I think it was constructive for all those who attended from all parties. I was also pleased to attend a session of BFM ONS alongside Councillor Merriweather and Councillor Clark, where the subject was considered in depth. And this was alongside many questions from members separately. And that concluded with a production of a supplemental pack in exempt that members were sent last Friday. So why are we bringing this here to you today? Well, there's really one simple answer to this. Financially, we have a duty to consider our options in the position that we're in. And although finances are the initial reason that we came to the table with Guildford Borough Council, there is a shared vision with Guildford to explore opportunities and to maximise and perhaps in time even expand our services to residents. Now, other members, I'm sure, will wish to comment on the potential existential threat posed by Surrey County Council and its mega unitary proposals and where this fits into that particular question. But ultimately, though, why we are here is the systematic, continued and relentless assault upon local government finances perpetrated by central government that it is often intent on pursuing in the face of all logic or sense. Now, COVID has compounded this, and I believe at the same time has firmly reminded residents the place and value that local government has in their lives, and in many respects has often provided certainty, stability, and indeed in some cases maturity through this period that has not been displayed by others. Now, I was not elected. Councillor Clark, Councillor Williams, Councillor Ward, Councillor Palmer, Councillor Gale, and yes, Councillor Mulliner too. None of you were elected to simply preside over a council, over a death by 1,000 slow cuts at the expense of services to our residents. Now, I firmly believe that service cuts should always be the option of last resort and not the option of first response. And that if we have the opportunity to explore alternatives to those cuts, it is our duty to do so and do so fully. Now, senior managers of this council and our chief executive will not be surprised, and I know understand entirely when I say that I feel it is also our duty to prioritise the delivery of services and those staff that deliver them over the management tier of this council. Now, I ask members as we move into the debate that this is to be sensitive to the fact that our staff might be watching, and also consider that although action comes with risk, inaction comes with just as much, if not more risk. Inaction is a loss of control. We'll be subject to the whims of further cuts from the government. At least the way that we are proposing here, we try to seize the initiative and make sure that any cuts that do come further down the line are in the right places and are not at the expense of frontline services that our residents need and deserve. Now, Mr. Mayor, my apologies. Before we get into that debate, I would like to propose an amendment in the form of an additional recommendation. I apologise to all members that this is done now and has not been circulated in advance. This amendment is as a result of discussions with Guildford Borough Council this afternoon. I will have to read the text of this amendment, this additional recommendation. That a report be submitted to a session of full council on the following matter. Part A, heads of terms for the proposed inter-authority agreement to establish governance arrangements for joint working. B, the proposed job description and terms and conditions in respect of appointment of a joint chief executive. And C, the establishment of a joint appointments committee, including its composition and terms of reference. If I may, members, I previously discussed the construction of an inter-authority agreement and that it would be brought to council along with the two groups that are stated here. In discussion with Democratic Services officers at both councils today, it was understood that we need to ensure that there is a formal recommendation to implement this as part of the recommendations before you, which is why I've introduced this now. I believe I have a seconder for that. introduce this now.
Point of order, please.
Sorry, who's that?
Councillor Mulliner.
Sorry.
Thank you. I refer to the first recommendation, which if I read, states...
Councillor Mulliner, I think as we've had this emendation, we have to discuss the emendation first. Is it relative to that?
It's actually fundamental, because if you look at the first recommendation, I'm assuming we're using the latest version, it retains the wording which that requires South East employers to provide, in time it was for the original agenda publication, additional data in respect of potential financial implications of appointing a single joint chief executive. That's been done. And advice on cost sharing arrangements. Now, I've looked at the document we've been provided, and I cannot see any advice from South East employers on cost sharing arrangements. And according to the text of the further recommendations, they are subject, it states here, and subject to the receipt of financial and cost sharing data and advice from South East employers, and any advice, etc., recommend to full council. We appear to be missing one of the key pieces of information we were expecting. And on that basis, how can it be proper to proceed with this item in the absence of that information? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Mulliner. Councillor Follows, can you follow that up, please?
In my opinion, I would seek the clarification from any Democratic Services officers in the room that the supplemental pack contains sufficient commentary from South East employers and from other officers as relevant and appropriate to the discussion this evening. My addition of the amendment number that would be part 3 of this essentially implements the requirement for any further inter-authority agreement, which is really the formal equivalent of what has been discussed in skeleton in the supplemental papers to full council for proper consideration and authorisation at a future date. So as far as I'm concerned, the supplemental papers are sufficient to enact this resolution. I would, of course, defer to any officers for comment if they don't believe that to be the case.
Yeah, apologies. Can't see us.
I can do. I mean, it's really a matter for you. I mean, the recommendation from the executive is as Councillor Mulliner has read it, subject to the receipt of financial and cost sharing data and advice from South East employers, any advice issued by the Chief Finance Officer, etc. It recommends to council that. I mean, it's now a matter for you to debate. Clearly, an amendment has been moved with a seconder. But it is a matter that you now can discuss as council. It doesn't mean that this can't go forward, but Councillor Mulliner raises a valid point in respect of that recommendation from the executive. So, but it's open to you to debate, I think.
Thank you. Now, can I remind all members, please, that we are debating the amendment, not the first part.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, we are not. I am asking to be shown the advice from South East employers, which we were promised, which appears to be a condition precedent to considering these recommendations, let alone any amendment of them. This is not a frivolous point.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, I can respond to that. Page 6 of the exempt papers, which I believe I can read without, proposed options for cost sharing models, the additional information provided by South East employers. I believe that the fact that the text starts with that, I'm not going to go into further without reaching exempt, but I'm fairly sure that that fulfills the requirements of recommendation 1, at least sufficient to have this debate and pass this resolution.
Sorry, Councillor Mon, were you coming back?
I'm just puzzled because I've got a recent piece of paper with page 5 on it. Is that what you're referring to, Councillor Collins? What's page 6? Oh. No.
Okay, well, let's not get into waving papers around, please. Can I now move on then, please, to do the emendation?
I think we haven't all had the papers, Mr. Mayor.
But I'm told you have got the papers.
No. That is what I've got. There's no page 6. And one of our complaints is that we get too little information, and when it does arrive, it's too late. And here we appear to have none at all. This is an important matter. And if advice from South East employers on the cost sharing, which I would say, given as Councillor Follows has acknowledged, the need for inter-authority agreements setting out cost and saving sharings is very important, we haven't got it. We're meant to get these papers a week before the meeting.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. May I request that we just clarify that everybody has got papers in front of them, because I and many members of the executive next to me seem to hold a paper that has page 6, which says exactly as I stated at the top. If we can clarify that members actually have this, as far as I'm concerned, this is what was circulated, and that's what I've got in front of me.
Yeah. Oh, I think it depends which one. Right.
Councillor Seaborn, can you help us here? You've got your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The second paper that the lead is referring to was circulated by email. It hasn't arrived in my house as a paper copy.
It has also been circulated by Mod.gov.
And it is not on my desk, my table here either. Only the first one. There was only one supplement provided. Thank you.
Councillor Townsend, can you assist?
It's a supplementary paper. We have a copy of it here. It's also on Mod.gov, and it's available to all councillors. It's page 6 on the supplementary paper, which clearly outlines the South East employers' approach. I won't obviously say anything because it is exempt, but it clearly outlines the South East employers' process for cost sharing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I shall need advice from this, Dan. Can you assist us here in whether we can continue or how we deal with this matter, as it appears that some have and some haven't. However, it was available on electronic means.
It looks as Ms Fleming and Ms Cameron are going to sort this one out, Mr Mayor.
Apologies, we'll just have to wait now. We'll have a discussion.
I have on my desk the copy that Councillor Follers is referring to, but I think Ms Cameron and Ms Fleming are looking at it.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask why such an important piece of paper isn't on each desk, along with the council agenda and the previous addendum that we received? I mean, this is very strange that all the members of the executive seem to have a copy, and no members of the opposition seem to have a copy.
Thank you, Councillor Rouse. Councillor Gale, I think, at the back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to show people that I received an email on Friday evening, which has this paperwork attached to it, and I can quite clearly see in front of me page 6. And also when I sat here tonight, there was a hard copy on my table, which has page 6 in pink.
Yeah, please, let's not turn this into a bun fight. I'm waiting for the officers to give me some advice that they're trying to look at it at the moment. I think I understand the position at the moment. I'll allow one more. Councillor Coburn.
Well, just to say, Mr. Mayor, that I asked for hard copies
on
of
the
all
table you sat
documents, and I haven't received it, and it wasn't on my desk. I mean, I haven't had what I have asked for and what I have always been given before, which is a hard copy of every document.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn.
So, members' apologies. So as you know, a PDF of the supplement was sent out on Friday, and hard copies have been provided for members, but it looks like the public version of one of the supplements has been put on some desks in error. So if you'd like to bear with me, I will see if we've got some hard copies for you.
And Mr. Mayor, could I ask further? Councillor Follows has mentioned another amendment. Could we see it in writing, please? It's very hard to follow these things just by listening to one talking. I mean, this is my point later.
If I may, just to clarify for members who just trying to understand what's going on here, the document was circulated on Friday, both as by PDF and also on Mod.gov. It was circulated by PDF actually at the direct request of Councillor Hyman, which I agreed to at BFM, which the Leader of the Opposition was also present at. And so there was a general awareness that the document was coming around on Friday, and I also added this in an email when I followed up as to the existence and content of the supplementary papers. I would ask that everybody be patient with Democratic Services. We are in a strange venue here doing this at a strange time. And I would just ask everybody to remember that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
It's a good
Thank
job
you,
it's
Leila.
not a school examination, Mr Mayor.
Can I just ask, I think we'll take a 5-minute break while they try and sort out the papers. It's now 7:10. Can I ask, please, if you'd like to take a quick refreshment break or relieve yourselves, please, we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you all.
Mr Mayor, before you break, could I basically make a point of order?
Councillor Gray.
Councillor Follows has said it's on ModGov. A number of us cannot access ModGov right remotely. I'm not alone, I can't, and that's one of the reasons why I've asked for papers.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. I think we have got that. As I say, if you can be back in 5 minutes, please, at 15:15. Councillors, if you can come in and take your seats, please. I believe there may be one or two we're waiting for. However, what I want to know now is there anybody sitting at their desks who has not got that bit of paper? Councillor Baker? Councillor Else? No, I want to know those. Don't.
What I know, but what I would like to say, Mr. Mayor, if I may, is that we've got them, but I'm afraid we haven't had time to read them and digest
Councillor
them.
Else, I understand that. What I'm asking at the moment is there anybody here who's not got it on their desk? That's the question. Thank you. Sorry? Councillor Mayoral, can you, and the others, can you take your seats, please? Right, that looks better to me. Now, well, I'll repeat my question, please, to the councillors who have just come in. Is there anybody who has not got that paper on their desk? Councillor Baker. And
I
sorry.
think I have it on my iPad, but I'd just like to know that what I'm looking at is the right thing. Thank you.
Fiona will come and advise you. I believe we have another couple of hands up as well if you have papers. And Councillor Mayoral. Councillor Cotter, you had your hand up. Have you got your paper now? Okay, it appears we all have the papers now, and I do accept we haven't read them yet. So it is now 7:20. Can I please ask you to take 5 minutes to read them? Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, point of personal explanation.
I can't see that
it's
was.
me, sorry.
Oh, Councillor Follows.
Could I ask that the minutes formally record that this document was sent by ModGov and by PDF on electronic mail on Friday evening, and that it does appear that some members don't check their email?
And Mr. Mayor.
Hang on.
Mr. Mayor, could you also put formally in the minutes that we are promised hard copies of important documents?
Thank you. I understand the arguments. Councillor Gray, you still have your microphone on.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible statement from.
Do you like to take your mask off?
Yes, I don't know whether I'm protecting myself by having the mask on or not, but I mean, that's an incredible statement. I mean, I do check my emails. I have not seen that document. I don't know when it arrived, but I did get a pink paper that was delivered, which wasn't the one that you're talking about. I can't access ModGov, and that's a known issue that we've had for quite some time. And I think,
Thank you, Councillor Gray. I think we understand the problem.
Well, I'm
You've got the
flabbergasted.
paper. You have the paper in front of you now. Can I please ask you to read it?
Mr. Mayor, may I raise a point, please?
Councillor Mulliner.
I've now had a chance to read this document. It seems to me, although it obviously contains much useful information and the views of the Deputy Section 151 officer, however, the terms of the recommendation are quite clear. The advice is to come from South East employers. And if you look at the fourth paragraph down, the South East employers have not yet shared any proposals of cost sharing to enable officer consideration. Guildford and Waverley Finance Office have met to discuss and outline options for sharing of costs. But where is the South East employers' advice? I'm being quite serious when I say that this is an unsatisfactory way in which to conduct business. It seems to me that we have not had South East employers' views on this, which was part and parcel of the recommendation. On that basis, I move that this matter be held over till a future council meeting. Thank you.
Is additional information provided by South East employers and reviewed by a council's deputy 151 officer. It's information pertinent to that resolution and doesn't undermine it in any way. Any issues with that, I think, are addressed by the amendment that I'm proposing, which will bring things like the inter-authority agreement back to council, which is what we promised we would do anyway, but it does it in a more formal way that members can see in a transparent way.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
If I'm allowed to, can I ask Councillor Follows for an explanation? This new recommendation, which refers to the heads of terms, the job description and joint panel, seems to fit in with what the pink paper is saying, that we need 3 weeks to agree a head of term. But I can't see how we can agree point 2 unless we've actually got that in front of us and for consideration. And we seem, in my mind, is going round in circles. I don't understand the sequence that the leader is proposing. Perhaps he could explain that in simple terms for my understanding.
Councillor Follows, then Councillor Townsend.
The sequencing of events, both for the autumn, but the next steps beyond part 2 of the resolution is outlined on pages 3 and 4 of the exam paper that's been distributed last Friday, and page 8 outlines the more general skeleton process that was what we discussed at Value for Money ONS. I appreciate that once you get beyond the first point of decision, it gets slightly more vague as we go into the future, but the discussion at BFM was to provide a rough theoretical outline for what would happen over the next few months if we pursued this. My hope is that members will have the opportunity to have a quick look through this now if they haven't seen it before today.
And Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to say, it doesn't say final advice. It doesn't say full and final advice. It just says advice within the recommendation. And I think you'd be hard pressed not to think that what is outlined within the pink papers on page 6 is not advice. It may not be as full advice as some members would like, but it is clearly advice. And I think that the recommendation therefore stands. Thank you.
Councillor Costa, then Councillor Hyman.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. I thought what I heard from Councillor Mulliner, but I'm sure he can, from Councillor Mulliner, I'm sure he can clarify, was what to me would seem to be legitimately a procedural motion, which was effectively to say, in the light of the failure to provide the promised and expected level of advice from South East employers, this matter should be deferred to a further meeting. If that is a procedural motion, I would be quite happy to second, but perhaps Councillor Mulliner could clarify.
Yes, before that, I will take Councillor Hyman quickly as it is hand raised. Then I'll go back to Councillor Mulliner. I didn't take that as a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like some clarification, please, if I may, on pages, or just confirmation, firstly, that pages 9 to 11 of the supplementary document that we have in front of us. So it's 9 to 11 of the supplementary document. That is a limited that is a selection of relevant paragraphs, which are on pages 93 to 97 of our
open papers. So that isn't actually pink. So if people wish to speak to that, even though it's on pink paper, it is actually on white paper in our full agenda pack, as I say, from pages 93 to 97. So if we can just have a very quick confirmation so people don't do fully realise, and so members fully realise that they are allowed to refer to those.
Councillor Hyman, Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Hyman is absolutely correct. The papers that were sent on Friday were all collated into a single exempt annex to enable them to be easily digested by members and received in one go without lots of different files. The requested bit that he's discussing here is the selection of risks pertinent to the selection only of a single chief executive. But my understanding would be that Councillor Hyman is absolutely correct. Those specific parts in 9 through 11, which is those risks highlighted for that area, are in the white paper and could be discussed.
Okay, thank you.
I'll now return to Councillor Monger.
Sorry, I haven't finished, if I may. Thank you. And on page 2 of the supplementary paper.
I think at the moment, Councillor Hyman, can we just go back to Councillor Hyman to find out if he did in fact ask for a motion or did he not? I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yes, I did. I repeat that it appears to me that there's a clear statement on page 6, the 4th paragraph down. South East employers have not yet shared any proposals for cost sharing to enable officer consideration. That seems to me a flat negative. So they have not given advice even to the officers yet, let alone to us. Either we are going to follow procedure and respect what is put in recommendations, or we're going to ignore it on the night. And this is not the way we should behave. I'm sorry if it causes inconvenience. We've also got this extra amendment or extra recommendation, which no one's seen. And I have asked Councillor Follows, and he's agreed to get it put into printed form. Yes, well, this is an extremely strange way of doing business. And I'm quite serious about that. This is not a game.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Have you got a motion, please?
I do.
Have you got a motion?
Yes, my motion is that we defer the 2 recommendations, 2 and 3, on the grounds that the one part of the preliminary advice has not been received at all.
Do I have a seconder? I have several seconders. In that case, we will go for a vote on it. Councillor Follows.
I would just like to advise Council my opposition to this motion in that it just flatly isn't correct. The advice in the paper is exactly what the resolution of the recommendation makes clear will be coming. Advice from South East employers on the detail that we've got so far. Anything further that we're doing in terms of bringing an inter-authority agreement is proposed in the amendment. And rather than defer such a matter, the other reason I would be against such an amendment is that even if we did concede that Councillor Mulliner was correct, which I absolutely don't, because I think the information is in front of everybody right now, even if that were the case, the more straightforward item, as we are all here anyway, at great effort and expense, would be to amend the original recommendation to remove that line, which of course is just equally unnecessary. So deferring is the least sensible option of many in front of us, even if we were to concede that Councillor Mulliner was correct, which I don't believe him to be so.
Councillor Murray-Weather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just register that in my view, proposals and advice are 2 different things. The paper on page 6 reflects the advice from South East employers. They haven't shared any proposals because I don't think they asked them for it.
Thank you, Councillor Costa.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to support the motion put forward. I think this is becoming, as I anticipated it probably will be, an increasingly farcical exercise. We were given an assurance that we would have the opportunity to have provided to us independent advice from South East employers. What we seem to be getting is a whole series of agreements based
about them, we're talking about their jobs, their welfare, their futures, their careers, everything. And this is shambolic. It's embarrassing. It really, really is. I actually think we owe it to the staff to look at this document and look at it properly and fairly. So we are seeing to be fair to our staff that we are not missing anything. However ineffective that may seem, or however much time is necessary, I would rather get it right now, later, having studied everything in front of me, than get it wrong tonight. Let's face it, the people here who care, who we should care about most, is the staff that they affect. And this, we owe it to.
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. On issue as important as this, we are bound up by what is actually, in reality, a very minor and petty procedural issue, albeit a procedural issue that is wrong, and we are detracting from a debate on a particularly important issue. So I would consider that we owe it to our staff to move to a vote on this ridiculous motion, to defeat it, and thence to proceed to a proper debate.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I'd just like to say, you know, it is quite normal practice to receive updates, and the update was sent around to everybody via email 4 days prior to this council meeting, so the evening of Friday evening. To have one or two councillors who haven't read it is quite understandable. You know, people are away or doing other things, but to have so many that seem to have not read it is quite unfortunate. And I do think that whilst caring is not just under, you know, we all care about our staff. It's not one particular person or one particular group. We all care about our staff deeply. And I think this theatre that is coming out here, you know, is really, really, instead of being helpful, is actually making things absolutely worse. We have got the advice. We've got the 151 officer. It isn't full and final advice. As Councillor Follows has said, it's clearly outlined the process within the paper that has been circulated, was circulated last Friday. And I do feel that unnecessary barriers are being put in the way in order to move this forward tonight. And I would go with Councillor Williams and just say, let's go for a vote and put this forward now and stop this ongoing theatre that's evolving here. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Townsend. I can't see more hands.
Mr. Mayor, I really do object. So far tonight, we've been called petty. I don't know what we haven't been called, because we object to something that the executive is doing. And
Okay,
it really is
Coburn.
unfair.
We
This
are
is
going
not
to vote on.
theatrical. The fact that we care about information, Mr. Mayor, is not theatre. It's actually just something that we do.
I think we agree on that now. If I could please say that we are now going to vote on that motion. Have the officers got a note of what that motion is? Right, so if I could have a show of hands, please, for those for the motion of deferment. I could now just have a show of hands for those against that motion, please. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, officers. Are you okay now? Can you give me the result? It would be nice to know.
Thank you, Mr.
Before I
Mayor.
get a crick in my neck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So that was 15 for, 22 against and 2 abstentions.
Therefore, the motion is lost. Thank you very much.
I couldn't hear that.
Can you repeat that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was 15 for, 22 against and 2 abstentions.
Thank you, Liz. Right, so we have now lost that motion. So we go back to the emendation that Councillor Follows was proposing, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My apologies. I will need to just confirm with Democratic Services if there is any ability to print and distribute this. For this aspect particularly, I do apologise. This was not able to be done before we got into the room today. I'm happy to read it out as many times as necessary. Got the device out if that would be of any use to people. But otherwise, I'll read it out again now, which is the report be submitted to a session of full council on the following matters. A, heads of terms for the proposed inter-authority agreement to establish governance arrangements for joint working. B, the proposed job description and terms and conditions in respect of the appointment of a joint chief executive. And C, the establishment of a joint appointments committee, including its composition and terms of reference.
Thank you, Councillor Follows. Now, I must point out we are now discussing this amendment, not the original. Councillor Gray?
Mr. Mayor, sorry, can I just double check? Councillor Follows is seconder, because I think it may have got lost.
Yes, sorry,
in time.
Yeah.
Happy to second that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, we had one original. I forgot to ask it again. Councillor Gray, you were first hand.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm really trying to go back to my original question. I'm trying to understand how this fits in to the other proposals. If the leader is saying that the heads of terms, the job description, joint panel has got to come back to full council, that it implies to me we can't really take any action on 2 and 3 until we get this back for the council to approve. Now, if I've misunderstood that, I'm more than happy to be corrected. Thank you.
Councillor Gray, Councillor Follows, can you clarify?
My understanding of this is that the process that is drawn up on exempt page 3 needs to be started by HR to actually, there has to be some decision to actually implement the first stage of the process, which of course includes the drafting of a proposed inter-authority agreement for this, but also job description and apportioning of the costs in a more formal way. I appreciate the order is not necessarily the most straightforward, but it has to go in that order for us. We have to, part 2 actually authorises HR to do the necessary work to enable 3 to actually have something to be brought to council. I apologise, that's quite a long-winded discussion, but my hope is that that's clear.
Thank you, as follows. I can't, Councillor Hyman, you're talking to the emendation?
Well, you stopped me earlier, and would just like to say what I wanted to say back then, which was that what I would like to do, with people referring to page 2 of their supplementary paper, which is all hoo-ha was about, everybody's got one in front of them. It's the white front sheet, second side. This is the recommendation that came forward from the executive. I want to be absolutely clear in what I'm actually looking at, if I may. First, can you confirm that the recommendation that or whether or not the recommendation we've got in front of us at the moment on this white paper, whether any of that stands or not? And I would like you, please, to read out to me at a pace where I can write it down, because I'm not able to see it. I'm not able to receive it by email because I don't have the codes for this ball here. Unless you want us to give that around so we can do that. I want to be able to write down what it is that we are going to be discussing. what your actual recommendation is, because right at this moment, I don't know. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Hyman. Councillor Collins, are you willing to read it out of place?
So if I can just confirm Councillor Hyman's first question, the original parts of the recommendation stands as is. This is added to the end. So I'll read it out slowly, but please do shout if I'm going too fast. That a report be submitted to a session.
I can't write that fast.
My apologies.
Sorry, is this something we're expected to write down?
No, not necessarily.
So is this an addition to recommendation 3?
Yes. And I do apologise for having to do this in this particular way, in this particular place, but it is unavoidable considering what we have to do to make sure that this is done properly, based on the advice we've had from independent and our own officers. So that a report be submitted to a session of full council on the following matters. A, heads of terms for the proposed inter-authority agreement to establish governance arrangements for joint working. B, the proposed job description and terms and conditions in respect of the appointment of a joint chief executive. And C, the establishment of a joint appointments committee in.
Right, that first. So, respect of joint appointment of chief executive.
I will, whilst the debate is going on, Councillor Hyman, ask for this piece of paper I have with the Wi-Fi code to be sent down to you, and I will send you it by email.
Councillor Collins, have you finished?
I have. I just want to make sure everybody's clear of what the amendment is, and at present, I don't think Councillor Hyman is.
Councillor Hunt?
Yeah, sorry. I don't want to apportion blame on anyone really, but I do find this process ridiculous. We are, this is extremely important. We're on time pressure here in this building, and we've wasted, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes to get to this point without even being able to discuss the thing that we're supposed to be discussing, as far as I can see. Whatever it is that the leader is reading out at the moment, I'm not even sure what place that has in the sort of proceedings that we have. And I just think that this is bordering on farce, quite frankly, with considering the importance of the topic that is supposed to be discussed.
Councillor Collins?
I actually do agree with you to some extent, Councillor Hunt, and I do apologise that we're having to do it in this way. If I can just sum up what the additional recommendation is supposed to do as quickly as I can without reading the full thing again. We need to bring to council for your discussion and decision at the earliest opportunity an inter-authority agreement that considers heads of terms for the new position that we intend to create, i.e. a joint chief executive for Guildford Borough Council and Waverley Borough Council, to agree that job description and also to establish the governance arrangements that we need to make it work and to be acceptable to members. And these are things I've discussed in the past. So a joint appointments committee, which as a start of a 10, we're proposing be 3 members from each council, including the leader of the opposition of both council, and also a terms of reference for a joint scrutiny committee. So effectively, we want to bring forward proper governance mechanisms for this. We thought that we were able to just do this of our own accord, but advice from officers is that we should be detailing how we're going to do that and get authorization to do it. And effectively, that's what recommendation does. And I apologise for the slightly lengthy language of it, but that's just how these things often have to be. But that is the intent of the additional recommendation, to codify things that we have already promised you verbally into the recommendation itself.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Costa?
Thank you. I hear you saying that this is an additional recommendation. Can I therefore be absolutely clear? On the document that was given to us earlier, and some of us have not seen previously, despite conscientiously checking everything, my understanding is that the original recommendation to full council were the two set out on page 2 of that document. The first one beginning, full council pursues the option of creating a single management team, etc., etc. The second one beginning, full council asks the council's HR manager to take the necessary steps. And what you have now read out is 3. Can I just ask, is that what the council is now being asked to decide upon? Because I think we ought to be clear what we're actually debating. We've got very sidetracked on this additional bit, but are those the 3 recommendations we're now being asked to consider?
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, as I clarified for Councillor Hyman, it's additional recommendation 4 at the end of the current recommendations.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, there are only on the sheet 2 recommendations to full council. The first one is to ask South East employers. That was a decision of the executive. And then the executive recommended to full council the 2 that I have just sent out. So this should be 3, if I mean, it's a joke, really. I mean, can we just be absolutely, you now say it's 4, it was originally 3.
Mr. Mayor, shall I? Mr. Mayor, I think there's a difference, isn't there, between how many the numbering of recommendations and how many recommendations to council there are. So on page 2 of that supplementary paper, you've got the resolution of the executive numbered 1. This is page 2. The resolution of the executive numbered 1, and then you have 2 recommendations to council, numbers 2 and 3. And what councillor Follows has put forward in his motion is the amendment, which would be number 4. There would be, councillor Coster is correct, 3 recommendations to the council if that were passed. So, but they are number 2, 3, and 4. So I think that answer
might have been quite helpful if Councillor Follows or someone could have explained that to begin with. Thank you.
Thank you.
My apologies, Councillor Coster, if I have not explained that clearly enough. I misunderstood that, well, I thought that it was clear in the papers, and I apologise if it was not clear, but the papers are in front of you on page 2 with it. So from my point of view, it's an additional paragraph to the bottom of that, and I hope that's clear.
Thank you. As follows, Councillor Mulner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I propose an amendment which the leader might be prepared to accept? It's heads of terms for the proposed IAA to establish governance arrangements for joint working. I'd be more comfortable if it said including the arrangements for sharing costs and savings. That may be implied, but it's not clear. And I think it's one of the most important aspects, and that should be spelt out. Would he agree?
Mr. Follows.
Although I do believe it is clear as what the inter-authority agreement puts out, I have no issue with that being added to the amendment, just to spell it out for everybody so it's clear.
Thank you.
Thank you. As follows, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just say, I mean, if the leader is accepting that, but it does actually state on page 3 in the intra-authority agreement exactly what it will, and the last sentence clearly states what Councillor Mulliner seeks to achieve, I do believe.
Okay. Councillor Follows, can we then...
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. If I can refer members to exempt page 3, it establishes what the inter-authority agreement actually refers to and what that needs to do. And the last bit of it is this will clearly identify how cost liabilities and savings will be shared. I've no issue whatsoever with the amendment spelling out that last section in the paragraph, but I just wanted to clarify with the leader of the opposition if he is content that the definition of an IAA and what it contains is defined in the exempt papers, and as such the existing amendment links it straight back to that.
Thank you. In fact, I'm sorry to be picky, but the A is just heads of terms for the proposed IAA to establish governance arrangements for joint working. That really seems to be the first part of the IAA. So I entirely agree all these other things are included in the IAA, but all we're talking about is the heads of terms. And I think for this very important next step, then the words, if you look to take the words from page 3, if we had it added on to your A, including...
Sorry, can just
Identifying how cost liability
Sorry,
savings
one
will be
moment,
shared.
please, can I just?
Mr. Mayor, can I
ask Dan
just
for-
ask councillors to take care that they're referring to the pink papers now. So page 3 that you're referring to, Councillor Muller and Councillor Follows, is on pink, and we're not in exempt session. So yeah, thank you.
Understood.
The wording there will be a useful template for this amendment.
So it's just a question of how far you start referring to those papers, please. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to agree the additional text that Councillor Mullen has proposed for the amendment. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but it doesn't detract from the issue either. And if it clarifies it for anybody else, I have no issue with that.
And Councillor Gray, and I think we'll call that a halt. We know what the emendation is, including that Mr. Mulner has altered. So Councillor Gray.
Thank you for tolerating me coming back. Very grateful to Councillor Follows for his explanation. And I think I understand it now. And I'm probably going to be contrary to that by saying in recommendation 3, number 3, full council asks council's AHR manager to take the necessary action in consultation to make the arrangement for the recruitment and selection of the single joint chief executive. Well, it seems to me that that's actually replaced by what Councillor Follows is putting through, because we're actually saying they're going away to prepare certain documents and bring them back to council. So if you could just clarify that for me. And it seems they can't actually do anything in recommendation 3 because they need to do the other action that we've just been discussing.
Mr. Follows?
My understanding is, and I apologise because a lot of this has to be done in a particular way on officers' advice. So there are areas here where I assumed the process was a certain way and it's ended up not being that way. My understanding of this process is that we have to enable through part 3 our officers to be able to go and do the work that's required in order for them to produce the report that is described in what will be the new part 4. That's how I understand the process to be. I admit it's convoluted, but HR processes often are. And that's what the advice is I've been given. I would ask if he's happy to do so, the borough solicitor, just to comment that I've understood that correctly.
Yeah. Councillor Gray, can I ask you to switch your microphone off, please? Okay. Right. In that case, can we go for the vote, please? This is on the emendation from Councillor Paul Follows, seconded by Councillor Clark. We've had it read out 3 times and we have had an apology for the way it's been presented. So we need to vote on this.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I must be completely thick, but I still don't quite.
It's just Councillor Follows' amendment with the addition of Councillor Mulner's. Sorry, I can't see who's speaking.
It's me. Sorry, I don't say much, but I haven't got a clue what this amendment is. I keep hearing it being repeated. I can hear most of the words, but not all of them. I need to see it in writing to be able to consider it myself and get it into my head. And all this change and revision of it all doesn't help in any way whatsoever. And so I'm unable to really take part in the conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Sadler. I'm going to go to our legal person again, and you've heard the objection to this motion or emendation. Is it valid, or can we take the vote, please?
We haven't, I mean, speaking to Ms Fleming, we haven't got the ability now to print copies for members. So it is a question for members as to whether they're happy to vote for, against or abstain on the amendment. And Ms Fleming and I did discuss this in the break. I think it's really for you to vote on, Mr Mayor and Council.
Thank you. In that case,
it is unfortunate, but it
emendation.
is unfortunate there are not copies for all members. Councillor Follows may wish to read it again with Councillor Mulliner's amendment included, if that would help, and maybe we can repeat it as many times as is necessary verbally. But unfortunately, we don't have the facilities here to copy for members. I'm afraid that's just unfortunate. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Can I just, Councillor Cossey, you've had several comments already. If it is a point of order.
sorry, Mr. Mayor, for not putting my mic on. You have suggested we're about to vote on an amendment. I would like clarity as to what is being amended. Two proposals were initially tabled for this council. My understanding is that Councillor Follows is now asking that we also consider a third proposal. In my view, and I would ask for your ruling on this, Mr. Mayor, it would make far more sense if we had the opportunity to consider these in the round. It's an addition, it's an addendum, it is not an amendment, and I think this amendment or addendum needs to be discussed in relation to the other two proposals. I certainly would want to object to it because it actually undermines the first two.
Thank you, Councillor Costa. Can I invite Councillor Sadler? Would you like to come and move up the front here so you can hear? And then perhaps Councillor Follows can go through it.
Mr. Mayor, it is a fair point that Councillor Sadler and others raised, that if they can't hear the amendment, they haven't got it written down yet, that they would have difficulty in voting for it. So, as I suggested, it could be read out again and as many times as is needed, given the circumstances, for people to be able to, for councillors to be able to write it down. I think that's the only way to get through this until councillors are happy.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, my point was that if Councillor Sadler can't hear it, then he can't hear it if Councillor Follows goes through it
Mr. Mayor.
So either Councillor Follows or Councillor Sadler must move so that they can hear it. Councillor Townsend, let's get
Can I
this out
just
of the
make
way.
a suggestion, Mr. Mayor, that potentially one of the Democratic Service officers there have got it written down. Perhaps they could go to Councillor Sadler and he might be able to either take the piece of paper or take a picture of it on his telephone and on his iPad, and then he would have a copy. Perhaps that would be a compromise. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Isherwood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Couldn't you send it as an email? Most of us have got devices on the desk, phones or pads. Couldn't that be done
Councillor
right now?
Follows did suggest that earlier.
Councillor Gale.
Yeah, similar. Could we just have it emailed round?
Councillor Sadler, can you actually get emails there? Okay, then let's go back to Councillor Townsend's suggestion. Have you got it written down?
Mr. Mayor,
Otherwise, it sounds as though we're going to have to read it out again. And as I say, if Councillor Sadler could move forward, then he may be able to hear it. Councillor Sadler, are you willing to come forward? And can we do it under COVID rules?
Sorry, I couldn't pick up what you were saying.
Yes, sorry. So what I'm suggesting is, if you cannot hear it because of your position, can you come forward? However, what you must do, of course, is do it within COVID legislation. So I'm going to have to ask the officers if he can move forward in any way that's safe. Yeah, Councillor Sadler, there appears to be an empty desk down here.
That's the wording of the forward, but it hasn't.
Okay, is there anybody else that cannot hear Councillor Follows?
No. Could I just ask Mr. Mayor why that is happening? Could I have a ruling on my point of order? I think I'm entitled to that.
Yes, I think we're going through that at the moment, Councillor Costa. What exactly do you want clarified? I thought we clarified it all.
I was merely asking whether you had, I will say it all again, and perhaps you might want to take advice from legal officer, I don't know, but the point is that you indicated we were now going to move to a vote on the amendment from Councillor Follows. I was simply pointing out that it's an addition to what I believe to be two proposals that have already been made to the council. And it seemed to me it would be proper, and indeed I saw an invitation from Councillor Follows earlier about having flexibility in this debate. If we could look at all three of those things together, they are now forming part of a package. And I certainly, there may well be others, would like to actually address the issue of this amendment and how it relates to the proposals that we've already got in front of us.
Thank you, Councillor Costa. I assume that Dan had answered your question. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My assumption would be that members would consider all recommendations in the round once we have agreed that extra resolution is added to the bottom. It's difficult to consider it in the round when we haven't agreed it yet. But I understand that that's what we'll be doing next as part of the substantive. So, Mr. Mayor, I would at this point motion to call the question.
Right, thank you. Now we have Councillor Sadler down at the front now, so he should be able to hear Councillor Follows. If we can all hear now, Councillor Ouch, have you a problem?
Yes, I do have a problem, Mr. Mayor. I have a hearing problem, and I have to say that I wasn't going to say anything, but I am going to now. When a meeting is conducted in this shambolic way, it makes it very, very difficult for me to follow what's going on. I need to have my papers in front of me, and to add an amendment to anything or an extra resolution to be considered makes it very, very difficult for me, because I can't always hear every word. I hear most things, but I don't hear every word. So I wasn't going to say anything, but I will. I think that this meeting is one of the most shambolic meetings I have ever been a part of in 10 years, and I'm not able to vote on this matter at all.
Thank you, Councillor Rouse. Now, if I could ask Councillor Follows to read out slowly the amendment so that Councillor Sadler and hopefully Councillor Rouse can actually hear what is being said.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will read slowly and also trying to make sure I incorporate the wording that was proposed by the opposition into the amendment. So this is additional part 4 as it is listed on the papers. That a report be submitted to a session of full council on the following matters. A, heads of terms for the proposed inter-authority agreement to establish governance arrangements for joint working and identify how costs, liabilities and savings will be shared. B, the proposed job description and terms and conditions in respect of the appointment of a joint chief executive. And C, the establishment of a joint appointments committee, including its composition and terms of reference.
Councillor Sadler, did you not receive that? Councillor Rouse? Thank you. And in that case, we now go into a vote, please. You know what the emendation is. So can I have those all in favour, please? Raise your hands. Now all those against, please. Abstentions? Thank you. We have the results. If you could read it out.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was 22 for, 8 against and 8 abstentions.
So that motion is, the amendation is carried. Thank you. Now, of course, we go back to the original. If I can ask Councillor Follows to introduce it, please.
So I won't repeat my original introduction. The additional resolution, additional paragraph is now added to the bottom. Obviously, we've got a little bit stuck in the procedural mud for a little while, so it'd be good if we could get back onto the actual issues at hand that are most relevant to our residents, which is the delivery of our services and making sure that we can effectively pay for them, and also making sure that we protect our staff. in the process. Slightly disappointing to see some members vote against a resolution that actually adds the scrutiny that many of you have been seeking, but thankfully that has passed, so that there will be some method of making sure that any future partnership arrangements here are properly scrutinised by this council. My suggestion, Mr. Mayor, would be to open this to full debate at this point. I at this point don't have anything to add.
Thank you. As follows, now I have a speaker, Councillor David Beeman. I believe he wishes to speak on this, and then I'll take other members.
Hallelujah. We're making some progress, I think. Yes, I'd like to just say as follows. As the end of virtually all remaining lockdown restrictions is in sight, the dark financial legacy of COVID remains and has to be faced and acted on now. Waverley is not alone in needing to identify savings and any potential income growth to correct its financial position. Despite promises from central government to do what it takes to give local authorities financial support, the amount of grants that's provided has been far from sufficient. Any action that can save costs without affecting services has therefore to be investigated, and the proposal for collaboration with Guildford Borough Council can go some way to achieving some of the savings both authorities need to make. As members will be aware, this is not the first time that collaboration with Guildford has been investigated. In geographical terms, Guildford and Waverley are a natural fit. Beyond that, however, there are some significant differences. In particular, there's a very different approach to procuring the delivery of services. Waverley contracts out services like maintenance of parks and gardens, refuse collection, operation of downride services, whilst Guildford undertakes most of these services in-house using their own resources and staff. Whilst there's likely to be savings to be made in the joint delivery of such services, it will be difficult to achieve these overnight. Nevertheless, I believe that a start has to be made. Of the several different options identified, the proposal to create a single management team is clearly an important first step, which I fully support. Whilst the financial savings through the creation of a single management team may appear to be relatively small, at least they are cost savings which should not affect the provision of services. Having created a single management team, work can then proceed on not just identifying what potential exists for further savings through provision of services and integration of systems, but also what can be achieved to improve services provided through working together. This, however, will take time if it is done realistically and pragmatically. It has been suggested that we should wait until it is known whether Surrey County Council intend to pursue their proposals for the creation of a single mega unitary authority. Whilst I suspect that we shall see the re-emergence of these proposals sometime in the future, we simply cannot afford to wait. To delay will result in cuts being made to services that could be saved. I shall therefore be giving my full support to the recommendation for the full council so that work can commence on creating the full single management team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Beeman. Are there other members with any question? Councillor Molnar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start off by saying that as an opposition, we regard our responsibility, both to residents and the rest of the council, to provide objective evaluation of proposals coming from the administration. And one advantage we can offer is we don't suffer from the proposer's bias. It's human nature to see the upsides of your proposals more clearly than perhaps you see the downsides. In this case, our primary view of this proposal is that it's premature. Savings are an important part of it, and yet we do not have yet a clear idea of the extent of COVID recovery, although we heard a welcome sign about car parking. So we don't know what the extent of the long-term impact on council income will be. And therefore, we don't yet know how the medium-term financial strategy will be affected. And that is why, in my opinion, it would have been far more sensible to look at this in the lead up to the budget for next year. Although sooner is better in most cases, in fact, the amount of savings that we appear to be talking about would in fact not amount to much in the opening year. Now, turning to what is actually proposed, appointing a joint chief executive and then a single management team would make sense if a few big savings wins were already clearly visible, and all that was needed to obtain them was clear and focused management. Unfortunately, no such big wins are visible, and the only predictable savings arise from moving to a single senior management team, and have been estimated fairly accurately by local partnerships at $684,000 a year. Obviously, we can only expect no more than half. But we're told that finding further savings is important. That is work for the future. None are known at the moment. But of course, we do have an indication, because local partnerships attempted to find other savings, looking at 3 areas, basically central costs, property, and third-party procurement. It basically regarded the second 2 as being unlikely to produce anything significant. But all it could provide in terms of central cost savings was 700,000. And having asked some questions of officers, it appears that some of these savings are already in our medium-term financial strategy, and others ignore the fact that some costs are borne and required to support the housing revenue account. So what we have is a major change to the way the council operates in return for very modest, predictable savings. Now, when you make this sort of change, your savings are cancelled out for at least the first year or 2 by the upfront costs, redundancy costs, possible retention costs, IT harmonisation costs, and it's quite clear that Guildford and Waverley differ significantly in certain areas, and of course the fees of the inevitable consultants are already required when a reorganisation is carried out. And lastly, but not least, by what I would call destabilisation costs. And these refer to the consequences of staff who leave an organisation undergoing unwelcome change for a more stable employer. They create gaps which have to be replaced by more expensive agency staff or contractors. And sadly, I believe there's some evidence of this happening at Waverley already. I was going to complain about the absence of a draft inter-authority agreement, but I'm glad that has been addressed. It would have been far better if that had been part of these papers. Fundamentally, I think the executive would have been well advised to take a moment for reflection when they saw the local partnerships report and realise how scanty were the savings that could be expected. And the question I ask is the upheaval and destabilisation that is the inevitable consequence of this project worth incurring for such modest, likely savings? I would like to hope it's not too late for the executive to reflect on this, and I will not be supporting these recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Marner. I have Councillor Else next, I believe. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My main concern in all of this is about our staff and whether the way this is being dealt with is at all fair to them. They are our most precious resource, and this has been more than proved over the last 16 months or so, when they have kept this council in operation during what has probably been the most difficult time any of us have ever had to live through. What kind of reward is this going to be for them? Have they been given a heads up about it at all? Have they been given any reassurance yet, if there is any to be had, because they do know about it?
Excuse me, Councillor, are we going into exempt here? Okay, carry on.
I'm not mentioning anything on pink paper.
I just wanted to make sure.
It's just a principle that's involved that I want to talk about. I've read these papers thoroughly, those that I had, as I would hope anyone who is going to vote on this recommendation this evening has. And I fear that it is too vague in its approach. It seems to me that it's being delivered as something of a fait accompli and offers more questions than answers. On page 56, 4.1 mentions a greater sharing of staffing. I haven't read anywhere in this paper anything that considers when or how to engage with the staff on this. And yet, this is apparently considered important. The supporting evidence in these papers is plentiful, but confusing and sketchy, to say the least. Furthermore, I understand that staff are already beginning to jump ship, which will inevitably mean bringing in agency staff. This has been mentioned by Councillor Mulliner. Has this extra cost been factored into the amount of savings which are going to be made? And with this loss of staff, inevitably, the corporate memory is in grave danger. The LGA's appraisal admits that the whole project is heavily predicated upon achieving alignment in culture, systems and processes, but go on to admit they are not in a position to give an assessment on how credible that assumption is. So we appear to be well on the way with it all, but still have yet to agree virtually everything in regard to all issues. There is just too much that is not clear or open or transparent. Collaboration seems to me to be something we should consider seriously, and I would have willingly supported option B. There is no need to jump so quickly, no need to make a quantum leap at this moment. The risks are far too many and far too great. Much more sensible to take a step back and take a more thorough, considered approach to something which will affect us all. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Rose. Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just would like to talk a little bit about Annex 1, which is the vision statement. I mean, vision statements are good. They're aspirational and help push organisations forward. What must be avoided are aspirations which are unachievable or unclear. Under the Y section, it states it will support and strengthen our parish and town councils' democratic and local mandate. I'm not sure how this will be achieved. What will this collaboration bring that you cannot do now? It also mentions the unitary as a threat. Since the government decided not to select Surrey as a pilot site, have you asked the leader of Surrey County Council, Councillor Tim Oliver, what the plans are, if any? I would hope that that question has been asked rather than an assumption. Under what kind of partnership do we seek? It talks about being based on evidence as to what approach is best. The key to this is the word evidence. But I'd also add after tonight, clarity, because I've got very confused on the whole issue tonight. It has the aspiration of joining the two organisations together, reduce personnel, reduce costs, but produce a greater level of services than the two did previously. It mentions culture, and I've always believed this is the greatest challenge that we will face. It states that the arrangement should be business-led. It uses words such as equitable, focused on delivery, shared ambition. These are great words, but I've seen these in numerous documents in the past. Point 16 says that no council can be outvoted, and I agree. But I can assure you, when a council receives the worst part of a deal, this will cause issues or an impasse. I've personally seen many collaborations emerge over the years. I've seen the legal services being joined and how Guildford took the lion's share of their time. Waverley struggled. It was not a productive relationship. I saw the huge amount of work that went into the waste contract negotiations with Guildford and how difficult that was. In summary, the document says the right things and uses the right phrases. It promises to make everything better, cheaper, and with a reduced number of staff. What the report doesn't give me is in confidence in how this will actually be achieved. What happens if these aspirations are not achieved and the performance and quality of the council services diminishes? How much will the cost be then? As I've said, I've gone through many similar processes, and I know, Mr. Mayor, you would have as well, in my previous work life, where areas have been merged and services merged. I've gone from seeing 9 divisions down to 5 to 4 to 3. It's had every combination. And in my experience, the savings are never fully realised. And years later, the decisions are reversed at a huge cost. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Denis. Councillor Merriweather.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted us to remind ourselves that this council's been facing budgetary pressure and stress since way before COVID. The Budget Strategy Working Group was set up by the prior administration in 2017 because the writing was on the wall in terms of government funding. And we all know that that funding has evaporated, and we have to take measures even pre-COVID. And anyone who suggests that the garden is going to be greener post-COVID, I think is not living in the same world. We've been living through year after year of this death by 1,000 cuts, and I can't think of anything more demoralising for staff than to have to live under that cloud. This proposal actually is, I've heard a couple of references to staff being worried by this proposal, and of course this proposal, as it stands, doesn't actually talk about staff. It talks about one member of staff. We need to remember that. And I know Councillor Mulliner cherry-picked one particular number from the LG report, the 660 for the senior manager team, and our share of that at 50% will be 330. Well, that would be the second largest benefit to us in a medium-term financial plan. It would be more than we expect our property investment strategy to grow over the next few years. It would only be marginally smaller than the business transformation benefits we expect. It's not to be sniffed at. That is what this government has reduced us to.
Thank you, Councillor Merriweather. Councillor Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say two things, really. I, first of all, just want to say something about the inter-authority agreement. I share the thought, and that's why I abstain, that it's useful now to have that. But I'm bound to say that I think the information that will be coming forward to us later is too late. This is premature. I can't talk about the detail of what that will contain because it's in part 2 in the confidential section, but members will have read that document. And those who have read the document will know that it contains all sorts of vital information which will help us decide whether this pathway forward can work or not. To take the first steps now is, in my view, folly without the opportunity to look at that first. And I still can't understand why we're rushing at this so headlong. But the main thing I want to just briefly refer to is a lot's been said about staff today. Well, I'm going to offer a perspective as a member now, but someone who spent their whole career working in local government and experienced many reorganisations, suggested mergers and things. Despite what Councillor Merriweather said, the thing that really got to us, the thing that really hit morale wasn't the lack of money. Of course, that was pretty depressing when we were all trying to do a good job. But when you suddenly think that there is an opportunity that your job may disappear, no matter how professional and focused you think you are, your family and other things in your life bear a much greater importance, and it is a significant distraction for any organisation. Now, if we're in a difficult financial position, and as Councillor Mulliner said, there are significant rewards to be gained to our budget from doing so, then I can perhaps understand why the political part of the council feels it must press ahead. It is absolutely clear that there are not significant savings to be made here, and some of the initial costs that we have seen will quickly wipe a lot of that out, frankly. The other things that I have found when this happens are the following. One, the promised full savings never, in my experience, actually materialise. Some savings occur, but never what is promised. Those who promote these things optimistically do so and suggest savings that, in my experience, never occur. Secondly, and I think this is really quite significant, senior and experienced officers jump ship because they need job security or are headhunted, and that becomes a significant detriment to the organisation in seeking, particularly in a period where it's seeking to reorganise all its services and merge them with another authority. There is a knowledge and experience deficit that it is very, very hard to replace. I think that's probably all I want to say, but I say it from the heart, Mr. Chairman, and really we've got to think very, very seriously about the impact something like this has had and ask ourselves if we have got the evidence in front of us this evening to justify that sort of impact on our staff and our organisation. Thank you.
And Councillor Costa, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you. I do feel that the opposition is seeking delay where it's really inappropriate for the reasons that Councillor Merriweather put forward. We have a serious financial situation caused by government cutbacks. It has been aggravated very severely by the pandemic and by the inadequate support given by the government. If we do not move ahead with savings of this type and of other kinds, we will find a couple of years down the line that we should be looking at service cuts. And I predict that at that point, the opposition will be outraged and they will suggest that the council should have acted sooner to avoid such cuts. In this particular case, I accept the point that a number of councillors have made that there are initial costs in any change of this kind. That is a reason to get on with it so that we can get to the point where it starts to deliver genuine savings.
Thank you, Councillor Palmer. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I listened with interest to the executive debate on this matter when it was debated, and of course the executive papers had the options A to F on their papers, which are shown on pages 58 and 59 of today's papers. And I was surprised that the executive, so far as I could see, did not debate the different options and come up with their preferred option. They went straight into the options that are now being suggested before us today. And I am concerned that I personally feel that option B it would have been a better option. As has already been mentioned, shared services didn't work in the past, but I think this is premature for reasons that are already outlined, but also the real risk of central government reorganisation of unitary authorities. Now, 20 years ago or so, we were looking at unitary authorities and Guildford and Waverley fitted the picture and was the obvious choice. The current suggestion for unitary authorities are that the two councils wouldn't be big enough. And therefore we'd have to add in at least one other council, which I preferred Mole Valley than Woking. But what worries me is that we have all this upheaval that is being currently suggested, and then it'll be followed before we probably finished implementing it, with central government saying unitary authorities are back on the agenda, and then we have to start all over again, double upheaval for staff, double the problems. And that worries me. So I would much prefer to take it. I'm not suggesting we do nothing further. I'm suggesting we do pursue the collaboration, but that we opt for option B before we go headlong into what is now being proposed. And therefore I'll be voting against this proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Goodrich. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues have addressed various aspects of the paper in front of us. I'd like to focus on Annex 4 on page 93 of our papers. This council has invested a lot of time and effort over the past 4 years in training members and senior officers in risk analysis. What is in front of us would almost certainly have our tutor throwing up his hands in risk analysis. It's a list of risks with no probabilities or severities included. And I fully realise that we're told in section 6.2.1 of our papers on page 61 that likelihood and impact ratings will be developed if collaboration is pursued, and that they will depend on the option pursued. But surely, if we're being asked under recommendation 2 on page 3 of our papers to make a very major decision, and moving to one shared management team is a very major decision, then the risks for that decision should be separated out and quantified in terms of probability and severity now to support the decision, and not after we have entered into the arrangement with our eyes partly shut. I note that individual risks relevant to the appointment of a shared chief executive have been separated out in the addendum in recognition that there are specific risks, but no attempt is made to quantify or rank these risks. For instance, what is the level of risk that going down the proposed route will alienate staff in both councils and reduce their effectiveness? What is the level of risk that those senior managers not chosen for the combined role will exit with a good share of the corporate memory? What is the level of risk that one of the two councils' affairs are in a far worse shape than the others, with a result that management focus will be on the more unhealthy council to the detriment of the healthier partner, and so on. These risks and many others are recognised and should be quantified and ranked now to support the decision, instead of which they're being kicked down the road, probably because they're going to make painful reading. Furthermore, the resultant risk evaluation should be reviewed by the council's audit committee before it comes to council. On page 58, we have option B, which recommends commissioning further research with a defined scope. So if option E is the target, then surely carrying out an exercise to understand the specific risks arising from that decision is a more constructive route to the best answer than making a partially understood decision now and then carrying out a proper risk assessment after the event. Shutting the stable door after the horse has bolted comes to mind. I fully appreciate that there is no such thing as a risk-free decision, but the responsible route forwards should always be to reduce the level of risk to as low as is reasonably possible. That hasn't been done for us today, so I most certainly won't be supporting the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Seaborn. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The local partnerships analysis in your agenda pack is a very high level analysis, and it does identify that there will be benefits from a collaborative partnership. But any option entails risks that could very well threaten the partnership objectives. Officers have been both neutral and professional throughout this process, and they have quite correctly laid out before us the main risks that face us. Listing these risks does not mean that they are all very likely. As the partnership develops, officers will need to further develop the strategic risk assessment with more quantifiable metrics, depending on the option that we are pursuing. There are risks listed in your papers, and they are all useful, and they are all necessary. And they will all play a fundamental role in developing the inter-authority agreement on collaboration, regardless of what that collaboration might look like over the longer term. I won't go into them all now, but merely highlight a couple and how they will be avoided. One is the risk that the partnership lacks clear objectives, leading to mission creep and inefficiency and dissatisfaction. Secondly, the costs and savings are not apportioned fairly, leading to mistrust and dispute. But all risks can be mitigated and avoided. And central to that mitigation and avoidance will be the inter-authority agreement, or the IAA, as it surely will become known. The special panel being created to draft the IAA, and once that has been done, it will come back to council for approval. The only step being considered at this evening's council is the recommendation to start the process of appointing a single chief executive. Ultimately, it is the new chief executive and his new senior management team who will be responsible for developing business cases for selected shared services. Now, putting cost savings to one side just for a moment, the main driver for me is that by working closely, possibly in a shared office building, both councils will become stronger together and more resilient in the face of the future budget pressures that Mark Merriweather has identified. And of course, this resilience will help protect the services of both boroughs. It is not an option to do nothing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I do take seriously the comments of a number of the opposition members this evening. Yes, of course, you know, we are looking at a risk analysis, and Councillor Clark has actually dealt with the question of risk and dealt with the question of the inter-authority agreement. But I would just go back to that fundamental question in terms of the risks of the alternative. The risk that's posed by the alternative is one of deep and damaging cuts in services, and that will have a serious impact on our residents, on the most vulnerable in our community, and on the morale of our staff. But I think we need to also have a vision as a council. We have a vision, we have a corporate strategy, and we have lots of things that we want to do. And by working more closely together, we can talk about economies of scale till we're blue in the face tonight, but the opportunities that accrue from collaboration, from cooperation, from working together, I think we do need to bear in mind. I mean, in conversations that I have with my opposite number on Guildford's executive, we talk about some of the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis, facilitating our sustainability policies, our trajectory to net zero carbon. And I hear exactly the same issues coming from colleagues in Guildford who are not a million miles away. And that I know I'm also speaking for my opposite number on Guildford Borough Council when I say that there are opportunities out there for meeting challenges together and meeting them better. Added value, collaborative working, cooperation, working to share agendas is much more important than defending our silos and looking backwards rather than looking forwards. And of course, there's always space at a Waverley Borough Council, full council meeting to draw on Aristotle's metaphysics, that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I think collaborative working can bring us significant benefits, and we need to be a little bit more visionary than we have been today. And certainly, I think we need to be addressing the issues rather than filibustering.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll now call on the leader to sum up, please. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry you didn't see me earlier. I don't think we are hurrying into this change. I think we're being prompted and prodded and pricked into it by a number of funding cuts that are coming from central government, funding cuts that have come from the COVID emergency, and even by the swift action of Surrey, who applied very quickly for a unitary with limited consultation, as I remember it. I also see that as someone who works in the tech sector and has lived through many mergers and acquisitions and redundancies, where companies do this well, there are important learnings and expertise to be gained through being good and flexible and light of foot and learning on how to do a merger and acquisition, how to accommodate the best of everything, each company, and to achieve those greater economies of scales. We now can see that in the years ahead, there will be mergers. And I think if we can be early adopters and achieve those learnings and put in place a team of excellence, we will be able to help our neighbours as well as achieve the best for our own communities. I see and note that one of the objectives of this move is to increase our services. And I do not see, therefore, that how increased services necessarily means reduced personnel. And I would foresee that there will be opportunities for those who are dedicated to public service to grow and expand and to move into new roles in this new joint Guildford Godalming collaboration. And finally, as a council, we are a good employer. We offer our employees the highest levels of protection and the most fair redundancy and all other procedures when it comes to letting people go. This is not what our constituents face. A lot of our people I work with in my generation, we have experienced many rounds of redundancies and unfair dismissals. I fear that we will not, as a council, replicate that, but we will achieve the best for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Now I have Councillor MacLeod, and as I say, we'll go back to Councillor Follows to. Sorry, Councillor Coburn. We're putting your hands up at the last minute. Councillor MacLeod.
I think Councillor Coburn was before me, Mr. Mayor, but
I thought she was waving to somebody else. Councillor Coburn. Then.
I think what is so disappointing with all of this is the idea that if we don't go for this package completely and utterly, we don't understand the issue and the alternative is doing nothing. That is absolute nonsense. There are plenty of ways that you can collaborate with another council. You don't have to go this far in to do that. And as people have mentioned, we've all had experiences of mergers. You can't mitigate all risks. There are certain risks in every merger that cause pain. They cause financial, cause physical pain and emotional pain. And this is going to be a really messy business. It isn't just the upfront redundancy costs. It is the redundancy costs further down the line. It is the unfair dismissal. It is the consultants that we're going to have to employ to make sure that we are doing what we are doing correctly. I just think, given the information we have, I don't go to these secret meetings with Guildford, so I don't know what they're discussing. I do know what the Guildford councillors phone up and tell me about, but it's all just hearsay. But on the evidence I have got, I have no problem working with Guildford. That's not an issue. But I do have a problem going in this level, this high, with all the consequences for our staff. And it's all very well to say we treat them well. Of course we treat them well. But it doesn't matter how well you treat somebody, that is their livelihood. If that is the mortgage, you have an issue. And you will not mitigate, I'm afraid, that. You can't wish it away. You can't wish pain away. It doesn't go that way. And I think this is irresponsible. And I thought it was irresponsible from the first time I read it. If you'd given me an option, as we've mentioned earlier on, about closer collaboration, quite happy to have supported that. But this, I think, is cruel. I think it's unnecessary. I think you're going through all this for, I don't know, political reasons. I don't know why. But I do know that this is going to be very, very damaging to a lot of people. I don't like it one little bit. I want to make savings and I'll support any means to
make savings and support our services and deliver for our residents. But no, I can't support this. I haven't got the information to say, and on tonight's showing, I'm not sure anybody's got the confidence that we know what we're doing going into this. So I'm sorry, I can't possibly support this. I think it's going to be far too damaging, but I do support collaboration and seeking other ways of saving money.
Thank you, Councillor Coburn. I have Councillor MacLeod and I have Councillor Koroflorishevsky. Now, we need to finish this item simply because we'll get thrown out at the end of the evening. We need to get through the agenda. So if I can take those, please. Councillor MacLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep my comments brief. Like Councillor Dinas and Councillor Cossa, I've been through the organisations when I was a fair bit younger, although in private industry, not in the public sector. And the board went badly wrong. And the reason was, in both cases, that all of the focus was on getting rid of the staff, and the senior management protected itself. And it fundamentally damaged the companies, and both the companies are ultimately taken over. And the thing that's impressed me about what's happened in this exercise is the professionalism of the senior management team, who aren't actually here right now at the council. Where they're looking to start this at the top. And as far as I can see, they're looking to protect the staff, and that's the way to go about it. And I also support what Councillor Merriweather said. In many ways, I don't think we have any choice but to do this. I don't like doing it at all, because it will affect people's livelihoods, as others have said. But there's no choice, and if we don't do it, it will be much worse later, because it will affect people's livelihood in a much worse way. I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Sorry, one final comment, if I may, for Councillor Dinas. I have got no doubt that Tim Oliver is still got the unitarisation very much in his mind, because some of the things he's doing, such as the exercise to set up what they call community networks, there's no other reason to do that other than if you're preparing for unitary councils a little bit down the line. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor MacLeod. Councillor Forashevsky. As I say, we need to bring this to an end.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be brief because I know time's moving on. Very interesting, and I listened with great interest to some of the comments that were made. And in actual fact, I agree with quite a few of them. We talk about a duty, and we talk about finance, we talk about vision, we talk about inaction, we talk about frontline services, we talk about opportunities, we talk about so much. Doing nothing is not an option. We all know very clearly what the consequences will be if we do nothing. But actually, in fact, I don't think this executive's been brave enough, because it hasn't gone far enough. You talk about opportunities, but you've missed the opportunity to get that point across of all those benefits that you could produce. And in actual fact, that's, for me, it didn't go far enough to convince me that that is the right way to go right here, right now. The words you spoke tonight was very convincing, but the report doesn't back that up. So I think you actually played it safe. I agree, doing nothing is not an option. I think it's premature. I think it's been rushed. I see the necessity completely for it, but I cannot support this tonight because what's in the report doesn't back up what I've actually heard. And actually what I heard was quite convincing, but it's not in the report. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Forashevsky. If I would now ask Councillor Follows to sum up, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sorry.
Oh, my
Sorry.
apologies.
Councillor Gray, sorry.
I did have my hand up before and put it down.
Okay, can you make it brief, please?
I will try and make it very brief. My key point in here is that I think we've got 22 people here who are not really listening to some of the points that we're raising. If we look at Waverley, Waverley has been extremely successful. The budget working groups that Councillor Merriweather mentioned before, they have produced savings, £1 million worth of savings. This management team have been extremely successful in what they're doing. At the end of the day here, we're looking at £330,000, and we're saying that if we don't go and grab this now, that our services are going to suffer. It's a threat. I'm not threatened by that sort of statement. I think that Waverley has been extremely successful, has been extremely agile. The IT that Councillor Clark has talked about have been very successful in terms of the speed, the way we've reacted to COVID. I would suggest, and I don't have a lot to back it up, but I would suggest that Waverley is ahead of Guildford. If we look at what Guildford's got to achieve, they've got a lot there. What I would not want this council to do is to have the eye off the ball in terms of moving for this collaboration too soon. We have more to save out of this organisation. I'm sure Councillor Merriweather would agree with that. We've got more than we can achieve, and if all we're looking for is £330,000, I'm sure we will find this from somewhere else. That doesn't mean I disagree with collaboration. I do, but we shouldn't be rushing into this in the way that we are. Thank you. I've cut it down by half, and I hope you appreciate that.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Gray. If I could now ask Councillor Follows to sum up, please.
Sorry, I have had my hand up some time, and just because you can't see it doesn't necessarily mean. Surely, are we not allowed to speak then, or have you drawn the line?
I can't see who's speaking. Ah, yes, carry on. Sorry, but please make it brief.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I know for certain that if the Conservatives had put this forward in front of us in this way when I was in opposition, then I would have certainly been haranguing them and saying exactly what they're saying. I do believe we should get our own house in order first, and Guildford should get their own house in order first, because there is a big difference at the stages that we're at in that respect. However, I do not want to hold up change. I think that there has to be change. There has to be change in culture. There has to be change in the quality of information and advice that we as councillors act on. And certainly, referring back to what Councillor Denis was talking about, the aims, the purpose of this, I fully support the purpose, as most people here have said they do. I think as if I had some sort of guarantee that what we've got on page 64, the vision, and you know, of all the words there, which are the nice words, if we were given a guarantee that yes, that's actually what we're doing, you know, so if that is exactly what we are going to do, and we can hold people to that, if they're accountable to that, and then I think everybody would actually support this. The issue I have is that on page 64 at number 9, it says this is a long-term politically led partnership, and I think that's a big mistake. We've got elections in 2 years' time. If this is politically led and the two councils aren't similar in their political outlooks after that, the whole thing could go totally pear-shaped before it's really even started, and certainly before anything's delivered. It should be either ethically led or, as it says elsewhere in here, evidence-led and business case-led. So I would like the leader to confirm in his summing up whether it will be business case-led and evidence-led, or whether it will be politically led, because I think that's a very big issue for us. And also it states here in a number of places, number 31, number 30, whatever, that we will be accountability and residents at heart, a new team culture. And I want to know that we are going to be able to see that and have that demonstrated for us. As I say, you know, on that level, then I'm happy that we just move forwards. And I would like clarification from the leader, if possible, because in front of us, we've got 3 recommendations, numbers 2, 3 and 4. I don't think anybody here has said anything which makes me think that anyone would be that vote against that is that we are I think everybody else wants. Of that.